What's up, guys? Welcome back to my channel. I hope everybody is having a great day, and I am going to be sharing my pregnancy journey and my birth story with you guys. I asked on Instagram if everybody wanted to see my birth story, even though my daughter is going to be 16 months tomorrow, and everybody said yes. I had a pretty crazy delivery. I haven't been able to talk about it. This is like the first time that I can talk about it without getting like super emotional. Little disclaimer out there, if you're a guy or a mom to be or squeamish, I would probably just turn this video off right now and just stay far away from it, because I'm gonna get into some really gross details, and honestly my birth story is probably on the more difficult side, and if you're a soon-to-be mama, you probably just want to steer clear of that. With that being said, let's just get on into the video, and I'm gonna start with the pregnancy. My husband and I started trying right after we got married, and it took us about 6 months to get pregnant. And I actually figured it out before I took my first pregnancy test, because I had been working out, and I was working out like pretty hard, and I felt like I was gonna throw up after my workout, which, sorry if you can hear that plane. Yeah, it's not unusual for me to feel super sick if I'm working out really hard, but normally it will go away after I cool down a little bit, or like I haven't worked out for an hour and I eat something. And 2 days straight I was working out super hard, and I just felt so sick afterwards. Like, I felt like I was gonna throw up all day long. It never went away. I ate, I drank water, and I was still feeling so sick. So I would say it was probably 4 days before I was actually supposed to get my period. I took a pregnancy test and it was positive. So yeah, I was super excited. I was like shaking when I saw the pregnancy test, and like I was super excited, and I couldn't wait to tell my husband. See, I started getting sick, morning sickness, around the 2nd or 3rd week of being pregnant. So most people don't even know they're pregnant, and I was already sick. So it started early for me. I was one of those people who had like morning sickness all day long, and unfortunately I didn't know better, but at the time I thought, like, oh, I'll just keep eating. Like, I'll eat and maybe it'll make me feel better. Maybe if I eat this thing it'll make me feel better, or maybe if I just keep eating it will make me feel better. And unfortunately it did nothing but make me gain, like, I think I gained over 10 pounds my first trimester. So I gained so much weight, and it didn't make me feel any better. So next time around I will be just, if I am sick, I'll just eat, and if it doesn't make me feel better, I'll just realize that I'm not gonna feel better. So one of the first things that happened that was like super scary happened around 5 weeks, and I started bleeding a little bit. And I know that it's normal to bleed around like the time of your period, and it's called implantation bleeding, and but it was quite a bit, and it was past when I would have gotten my period, so I figured that it was a little late for implantation bleeding. So I called my doctor, and they told me to go in for an ultrasound. And so I went to the hospital, and they told me that I had a blood clot, which could have resulted in a miscarriage if the baby like detached from the uterus. I think that's what would have happened. I was super scared. I was put on bed rest. We were just like waiting, and I had to put progesterone pills up my vagina, and that was not fun. So I did that for probably a month, and then the bleeding stopped. So yeah, I was put on bed rest for probably a week, and then went back for a follow-up, and everything was okay. So everything worked out with that, but it was a really scary thing to happen in the very beginning of my pregnancy. The next thing was that I gained 65 pounds, and it really caused me to have a lot of ligament pain, joint pain, back pain, sciatic pain, and it just made my pregnancy really uncomfortable. I tried exercising through it. I tried, you know, stretching, doing yoga. I tried all of that, and I was still in a lot of pain. Like, my wrist was hurting. If I slept on my arm funny, my wrist would hurt in the morning. It was the weirdest thing. I am 5'1", so I'm not a very tall person, so 65 pounds was a lot. Like, that was a lot of extra weight for me to be carrying around, and it was just really hard on my body, so it just didn't feel very good. Another thing that happened during my pregnancy was our family went to Tahoe around Christmas time. Then I ended up falling down the stairs and I was having contractions, and I went to the hospital. They were monitoring me. I think I was having contractions because I was dehydrated rather than the fall. Everything obviously ended up being okay, other than the fact that I sprained my ankle and I had to be on crutches, which I am the clumsiest person and was pregnant and on crutches. One of the last things during my pregnancy that was really difficult was around 2 months before my daughter was due. I developed preeclampsia. I was having really high blood pressure when I was going to the doctor probably the last 3 months, but I was also working a pretty stressful job at the time. So they were keeping an eye on that, and I eventually developed preeclampsia. I was put on bed rest again, and this time it was going to be for the duration of my pregnancy, which was about 2 months before she was due. I was going to a bunch of doctor's appointments, and they kept telling me that my baby was going to be really big, and I was only like 7 months pregnant. About 2 or 3 weeks before my due date, I went in for a doctor's appointment, and I told them that like I wasn't feeling her move as much and I was a little bit worried. So they sent me to the hospital, and they told me that I was going to be induced. I was admitted into the hospital like around 1 p.m. after my doctor's appointment. They immediately gave me Pitocin to try to start like contractions so that I would start dilating. I was having contractions, but they weren't helping me get dilated at all. So they broke my water around 2 o'clock in the morning. So after they broke my water was when the contractions like really kind of started to hurt, and I was having like back contractions, so it was pretty high up on my like stomach area that I was feeling the contractions, and then all in my back. And I believe that was because she was face up, so I think that's when you start getting back contractions. I asked for an epidural around 3 a.m. after they broke my water. They had this huge ball that was stuck between my legs while I was laying on my side, and it was to help open up my hips, because again, they kept telling me my baby's gonna be super big, my baby's gonna be super big. So fast forward, it's probably like noon the next day, and my OB comes in, and I think I was about 8 or 9 centimeters. He came in and he was like preparing me and talking to me, and once I got to about 10 centimeters, I was able to start pushing. I ended up pushing for over 2 hours, and it was the most exhausting experience. I've never experienced anything more exhausting. When you push, you only push for like 10 seconds and while you have a contraction, and then you stop pushing for a minute and you give yourself a little break, but it takes the breath out of you. I mean, I was like I was dying. They like put a mirror in front of you so you can kind of see the head coming out, and like every time I would push, they would encourage you to look at the mirror so you could see their head. At that time, my OB was back in there, and he basically said, I'm going to have to do an episiotomy, and I was already kind of aware that like that was probably going to happen. There's mixed opinions on whether or not like you should cut or should be cut or you should tear. He mentioned that there would be something called shoulder precaution, which is where they're afraid that the baby's shoulders are going to get stuck in the birth canal while the baby's trying to be delivered. Because she was supposed to be a pretty big baby, they were really concerned about that. Basically what that meant was 25 people in my room while I was delivering the baby, and I had a nurse that was like, I was laying on my back, and a nurse was literally standing on my bed over top of me, pushing on my belly. And then I had my doctor, and then I had a bunch of other nurses, and then I had tons of other people, which I don't even remember who they were anymore, but they were just like standing over here, just like waiting in the background. I didn't feel anything because obviously I had an epidural, but I felt the pressure. So he cut me and then laid me back, and the nurse who was standing on top of me, literally like when I pushed, she pushed down on my stomach, and then the baby came out. And I guess my husband kind of told me later that like the baby didn't just come out, like he really had to like get in there and like pull her out because she got stuck. He said he was it was the scariest thing. He thought like Sydney was not going to come out alive, because he was like trying to get her out and couldn't get her out. He said that was like a super scary thing to see. At that point, like when the baby came out, like it felt like the hugest relief. It was the weirdest feeling. I felt so relieved. The weight of the baby just coming out, it was, I know that's so gross, but seriously, she felt so heavy all the time, and I couldn't breathe, and I felt like I could breathe for the first time. And then they delivered the placenta and whatever. I didn't feel any of that happening. All the stuff I read, and I tried to prepare myself for birth, so I was like, oh yeah, the doctor's gonna stitch me up now. Basically what happened was I saw the doctor, and literally my OB had blood splattered all over him. Like it was really bad, and I had no idea like how much I was supposed to be bleeding or not. But I got to see my daughter. I heard her cry. I didn't even get to hold her yet. I just got to see her for a second, and they basically were like, she's bleeding out, we need to get her into the operating room like right now. I know that I was given antibiotics because they had broken my water so far before my baby was delivered that we both had a fever. So she had a fever, I had a fever. I was being like carted off, didn't even get to hold my baby yet, and didn't know how she was or anything. I heard her cry once, and then that was it. No one was really telling me anything. All I knew was that I was like bleeding too much, and they were gonna give me, I think they gave me more Pitocin, or they gave me something to kind of like stop the bleeding. So when I got into the OR, they immediately gave me a second IV, and I'm not sure if one was for medication and one was for like, I don't know. But they were trying to keep me numb. They were also trying to give me IV fluids. I was also given antibiotics, and then I was also being given something to stop the bleeding. So I don't know, I was all drugged up. The first thing that happened in there that I was like, what is going on? So basically I heard the nurse ask my OB if the pill was supposed to be given orally or if it was supposed to go in my rectum. And I overheard my doctor tell the nurse that it had to be given orally because I didn't have a rectum anymore, which was like the scariest thing. And I turned to the nurse and I was like, I seriously was like, the first thought that came into my head was like, oh my gosh, I don't have a butt. And I turned to the nurse and I asked her, I was like, am I ever gonna be able to go to the bathroom like a normal person? And she says, yeah, like the doctor's gonna get you fixed up, you're gonna be just fine. And so I was like, okay, phew. And then I was like, what is going on with my baby? Like, I need to know, is she okay? Like, what's going on? And the nurses were fantastic. And this one really sweet nurse, she came back in and she told me that, you know, my husband had to give my daughter formula because she had low blood sugar and she really needed to eat. And I was like, oh man, that hit me so hard because I really wanted to nurse her the first time like she ate. Like that was something that I just felt like it was a given, and it just like knocked the wind out of my sails when I found out that she had been given formula, and that she had been given antibiotics, but that she was okay and that she was with my husband. And so that made me feel better. She was okay, but it just killed me that I wasn't going to be able to nurse her for the first time. So after all of that, I'm basically just sitting there, my legs up in stirrups, and my OB was able to kind of stop the bleeding, and I was just kind of sitting there because they were trying to contact a rectal surgeon specifically to come like put me back together. I guess the only 2 or 3 people in the area, like no one could get a hold of them. And so I literally was sitting there for 2 hours while I had an anesthesiologist behind me, like trying to keep me numb and all drugged up. And then I was just sitting there with my legs like up in stirrups, just sitting there for 2 hours. And then they finally were like, okay, well, we can't get a hold of any of the rectal surgeons, so your doctor's gonna do it. And he came over and he's like, I'm just gonna take care of this, I'm gonna take care of you, I'm gonna fix it. And I was like, okay. So I was a little scary, but he did a great job. I was really, really thankful that he was the one that fixed everything. But after all of that, like I was finally able to go back to the room and like meet my baby, but I was so drugged up. I was slurring my words. I was shaking. I was like done, like could barely hold her because I had so many drugs in my system. And then the epidural actually started to wear off, and I realized that my right leg wouldn't move. It was like a dead leg and it felt super heavy, and the only way I could move it was actually like physically pulling up my leg and moving it, and I was in so much pain. So I had like a physical therapist come and my doctors come. I'm not entirely sure how it happened. It could have happened either while I was pushing or someone was like leaning on my nerve while they were like waiting to come sew me back up. I pinched my femoral nerve, and so I couldn't move my leg, but it was also in like a lot of pain. So I was on pain pills for 2 weeks. I used a walker for about 10 days after giving birth. And honestly, like throughout my recovery process, that was probably the most painful part, was my leg. I was like crying in pain. We also had a few more complications with Sydney. She had low blood sugar, and so it was just heartbreaking. Like they came in every 3 hours to test her blood sugar levels. So they'd prick her on her foot, they'd take the blood, and then a couple of times she had to be fed through a tube because she wasn't eating enough, and that was like a really hard thing to watch. She also had jaundice, which is really normal, especially for Asian babies, but that was it. Like, she was super healthy, and like she ended up being fine. Everything was okay with her, and I think we were there for about 4 days for her and for me. After everything was said and done, I guess my OB told my husband that out of all of the deliveries he's done, like that was one of the top 5 most difficult deliveries. So it was pretty bad. And I guess my husband later also, he told me that when I left the room, there was like puddles and puddles of just blood everywhere. Like, and he said that no one came to clean it up for a really long time, and he was like getting really upset. He was like, I actually like yelled at someone to like get someone in here to clean it up because I couldn't stand just like, he's like, I didn't know if you were gonna be okay or if you were dying, and like all I was doing was holding our baby and staring at like a bunch of blood from you. And he didn't like know what, like how serious it was or what was going on with me for a really long time before the nurses came in to tell him. So he was like sitting in there just scared to death that he like lost his wife and the mother of his child, and I can't imagine that. I had a little bit of like postpartum depression, which is pretty normal for going through something so crazy. But yeah, so that is my pregnancy and birth story. If you have any questions or you want to know like anything about my recovery, just ask me down in the comments section and I'll get back to you. If anybody who's watching this though who is pregnant, like I don't think that anybody else was gonna have a delivery like that. Like, it was pretty bad. I probably should have opted for a C-section, but I really wanted to try to have her vaginally, so I did. But yeah, it was pretty crazy experience, but we're all good now. We're all healthy, we're all good. I'm back to normal. So if you have any questions, just drop them down below in the comment section, and I hope that you enjoyed watching this video and that you didn't get too grossed out by it. But thanks for watching, and if you did like my video, I'd appreciate a thumbs up, and if you'd like to subscribe to my channel, I would really appreciate that. So I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.